All right, seeing that it's noon, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Sakura's webinar series, Coastal Observing in Your Community. Thank you so much for sharing your virtual lunch hour with us. My name is Abby Wakely, Sakura's Communications Director, and I will be facilitating and moderating the webinar. Sakura is hosting this webinar series to discuss, highlight, and raise awareness about coastal ocean observing activities in the Southeast U.S. Sakura is the regional coastal ocean observing system for North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. We are one of 11 that makes up the NOAA-led U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System, also known as USIUS. Our mission is to sustain and promote observations that help keep you safe. This is a quick snapshot of the technology we support to accomplish our mission. I did want to take the time to share with you all one upcoming opportunity within Sakura. We have seen that there's an increased demand for high quality online science education resources due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sakura is trying to be responsive, and we are soliciting proposals to develop online or online accessible K through 12 marine science curricula and or activities that can be implemented by parents, teachers, and other educators. Proposals are due June 18th, 2020, and right down here, you can find the link for more information or just go to sakura.org and it is on the homepage. All right, let's get to the reason you are all here, the webinar. All participants will be in listen-only mode. You are encouraged to type questions for the presenter or technical questions for me in the bottom right-hand chat or Q&A box. I will respond to them directly or post the questions to our presenters after their presentation. We are recording this webinar today and we'll be posting the recording on the Sakura website. We're very, very excited to welcome three speakers from the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Wilmington, North Carolina. They will be presenting the Rip Current Challenge, a coastal hazard with far inland implications. I'm going to take a moment and quickly introduce the three speakers before passing it off. We have Steve Paff. He is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service Wilmington, North Carolina office. He has a strong passion for marine and coastal weather hazards. Steve greatly enjoys engaging the public with safety and awareness information and working with a diverse group of partners. Steve will be celebrating his 26th year with the agency this summer. Congrats, Steve. Next up, we have Mark Willis. Mark Willis serves as the meteorologist in charge for the National Weather Service Office in Wilmington, North Carolina. The National Weather Service Office in Wilmington is responsible for weather forecast, warning, and observation operations for the Southeast North Carolina and Northeast South Carolina. Mark recently moved to Wilmington from the Outer Banks, where he served as Director of Forecasting for the popular marine weather company Surfline. And lastly, we have Vicki Oliva, and she has been a meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Wilmington, North Carolina for 2 years, and she has been leading the Surf and Rip Current Program since late 2018. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us. Steve, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to presenter so you can share your screen, and it should be passing off privileges now.
Okay, Abby, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you and I can see your screen. We're good to go.
Excellent. Abby, thank you so much for hosting us today, and thank you to everybody for taking time to join us. We have a lot of great information to share with you regarding rip currents, and our main intent of this was to shed more light on this problem and the challenges that we face, and hope that you take something away from it and can help us by sharing this information with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers. This is one of those hazards that not a lot of people are familiar with. So the more information we can get into the hands of people, the better off we all are. And while rip currents are confined to the surf zone, the impact they bring to families extends well beyond our beaches. And we go back to 2000 with rip current statistics just in the Carolinas, and there's been over 143 drownings, 143 people lost, 143 families upended as a result. And we strongly feel that if some of these situations that they had some basic information, the outcome would have been much more different. And if you think about it, they're one of the related hazards that doesn't come to you. You actually have to go to its environment to be impacted by it. And that in itself creates a significant challenge, since it's extremely difficult reaching people from across the nation with safety information. So I feel like we do a great job along the coast, working with schools, working with our partners. But we're seeing time and time again where it's people from inland areas where we at the coastal weather offices don't have the reach inland as many of the people come from the nation's heartland, from even from around the world to visit our beaches in the Carolinas. So a very unique challenge that we face. And what we wanted to talk to you about, we're going to break it into 3 sessions, and I'm going to talk about the rip current basics, the statistics that we maintain, and some interesting but yet sobering information from those, why they're so dangerous, how to spot them, and then I'll turn it over to Mark, where he will focus on the Hurricane Lorenzo event, a super rip outbreak that we had last year with Hurricane Lorenzo. And then we'll hand it over to Vicky to talk about the importance and the diversity of the partnerships that we have, some specific rip current products and the decision support that we're involved with, and also the evolution of the program. Where do we hope it goes, and some of the things that we're working on, not just the Wilmington office, but all the coastal weather service offices, especially in the Eastern Seaboard, where there's a lot of cutting edge things going on within the agency and with our partners. Well, let's jump right into it. What is a rip current? And it basically is a current that extends from the beaches through the surf zone and out beyond where the breaking waves are. And lifeguards call these things drowning machines. They're basically like treadmills in the surf. The misconception is that they pull one under if they're caught in a rip current, when that's not the case. They pull you away from the shoreline. The only time you go under is if you can't focus on what remaining energy you have staying afloat. So if you can't stay afloat, then you can't swim, and then it becomes very much an issue. They extend through the surf. They can be 100 yards offshore. They're typically 30 feet wide, and they have 3 main components to them. They result in 80% of surf-related rescues in the from the USLA. So people often hear in the news of shark attack or something like that when it's really the rip currents that are the most problematic issue in the surf zone. And in the nearshore environment, we see in this diagram that surf zone area is where the rip currents can be found. So we have the shoaling zone where the waves are beginning to feel the bottom, and they start to break in the breaker zone. And as the wave energy is dispersed all the way to the shoreline, that is the surf zone. So this is the environment where they exist. There's other types of currents as well, longshore currents and tidal currents and inlets, but this is the one that carries people away from the beach. And if they don't know what they're dealing with, they come into significant problems. As far as the structure goes, this is a very strong looking rip current. And there are 3 main parts to that. There's the feeders, which are near the coast. Typically there's 2, but there can be 1 feeder depending on the configuration of the shoreline. And the neck is the part where the current is at its strongest. It could be 6 to 8 feet per second, and that's faster than what an Olympic swimmer can swim at. So you can imagine, you're dealing with people coming from all over the country. Not only that, and the potential inexperience to bring with them, but their swimming ability varies significantly from non-swimmers to very good swimmers. But even very good swimmers, on days when rip currents are very strong, if they don't know how to get out of one, then we're going to run into problems. And then it disperses beyond where the breaking waves are, and that's called the head area. So feeders, neck, and head. And how do they form? There are a couple different processes going on, but the basic way to think about it is mass in, you have to have mass out to stay in balance. So you have incoming waves that pile up onto the beaches, creating pressure imbalances in the surf zone. And if you have water piling up, water is going to want to try and escape, and that's typically through a path of least resistance, and that is a break between 2 sandbars. We see the white water breaking on the sandbar. The rip channel in the middle is deeper, so there's no breaking waves there, and then we have the sandbar on the flank here. So this is the deeper spot, and the waves are coming in, breaking, and then finding the waters flowing back out away from the shoreline. When we look at some of the statistics, that we've been keeping track of since 2000. Again, 143 confirmed rip current fatalities in the Carolinas, and we feel that's underdone. Oftentimes, you don't necessarily hear of anything with a definitiveness. You hear of someone where they find a body that washes up, and if it happened when someone was swimming at night, or they don't know the circumstances why they were in the water, we don't just assume that it was a rip current. We only include it in this specific category if we've got confirmation from maybe someone who witnessed it, or the lifeguards, or the rescuers, or whoever might have witnessed this situation. So we feel it's underdone, and around the country, on average, there's 100 fatalities a year, and the USLA, Sea Grant, the Weather Service, we feel that is underdone as well. We just had a drowning last weekend, Carolina Beach, and we don't know the situation behind that, so we're waiting more information. So sometimes it might take a few weeks to figure out what's going on when we can talk to everybody that we need to talk to determine if it was rip related or not. When we delve into these numbers a little further, we see that 25% of the drownings are from bystanders attempting to make a rescue. So someone just trying to be human, do the right thing. And they're oftentimes very inexperienced. I mean, not many people have lifeguard training. So just that experience level, they might be able to make it out to the person that is in distress, but they're not prepared for, when they reach that person, what is going to happen. And typically someone who is trying to stay afloat, their instincts are kicking in, and they're not trying to purposefully push someone underwater. But when someone swims out to them, they're trying to climb on top of them to get air, and they oftentimes will push the rescuer underwater. So we have had many reports over the years where the person being rescued survives, but the rescuer doesn't. So that's 1 in 4 of the drownings since 2011. We're able to go back and look at, why was that person in the water? Was the bystander. So that tells us something very important there, and we'll get to that shortly. When you look at the age group that's most affected, it's males 41 to 50 and females 31 to 40. My speculation is just based on I'm in this age group, is that mentally, I think maybe I'm a little more physically capable than I really am. And if I'm at the beach and I'm thinking I can go in and make a rescue, and I'm unknowingly putting myself at danger. We'll talk more about seeing someone in distress towards the end of my part of the presentation. And when you break it down between male and female, males are 5 times more the number of drownings than females, and males account for 83% of the drownings in the Carolinas. And then the last point, which gets back to our title, 84% of the drownings are people from inland areas. Again, I think the messaging is real good. We've got phenomenal partnerships with the local TV stations, between the local agencies along the beach or have responsibilities at the beach. But I feel like we're missing a message farther inland. Those implications extend well beyond just where the beach is. So what we can learn from those statistics, again, we need to better reach people with rip current awareness information in Kansas and Ohio. My counterpart in Wilmington, New York, gave a presentation before the pandemic really impacted the country, and he asked, and this is folks in Wilmington, New York, he had an audience of 50 people, how many people were going to be going to the beach this summer, and almost half raised their hand. So we've got a lot of people coming to our shoreline that have to get this information. We also need to do a better job of informing our bystanders of the information that will help keep them safe and don't put themselves at risk. We do a great job of telling people what to do if they're in the water caught in a rip current. We need to really continue highlighting what people can do if they see someone in a rip current. All right, why are they so dangerous? There's 4 main reasons why they're so dangerous. First and foremost, from this picture here on Carolina Beach, they can be very hard to spot, especially if you're down at the waterline at a lower angle than you were, like you were walking over the dunes or up on a pier or something like that. So for one, they're very hard to identify in the surf. Second, we have a large part of the population that has very little knowledge about what rip currents are and some misconceptions that exist with them, like they pull you under, they don't pull you away, and those sorts of things. So the knowledge base with the people encountering them is low. And what Mark is going to focus on with the Lorenzo case is sometimes you have the worst events, the worst outbreaks occur with the best weather. People assume because the weather is nice that the ocean will be nice. The ocean is not like swimming in a pool. I know you all know that, but we can't assume because the weather's nice that ocean conditions are going to be nice. There's large swells that can move away from storms that are several hundred miles offshore that can generate rip currents under cloudless days at the beach. And then people make the mistake. So here's someone caught in a rip current. The mistake is trying to outswim them when they should be swimming out of them. They stay on the treadmill, they get tired, they lose all their energy, and they can't float anymore, and then they get into trouble real quick. So get off the treadmill, swim to the side, swim parallel is what we need to do, and what we need to teach people if they run into one. How to spot a rip current? There's several different things, several different cues in the surf that you can look for. The first, the picture on the left-hand side, and I apologize for the dogs. The first is the muddy appearance, a turbid type look. This is the current that is carrying away sand and sediment from the shoreline out into the ocean. The higher up you are, the better vantage point you have. Like this picture on the right-hand side, you can see that rip current extending out nicely. Muddy relative to its surroundings. Sometimes you can see the foam carrying through the neck and into the head, like in this example here. There's 3 distinguishable rip currents. Again, the higher up you are. And these are persistent areas too. Whenever you get waves breaking, you might get whitewater in certain spots, especially on sandbars, but area where the current is fighting the incoming waves might give it that choppy, foamy look. And then you can get areas where the water looks darker than the surrounding areas. And this is a great example. You have this family getting ready to go in the water right where this rip current is, but this dark area is the break and the sandbar. The brown lighter areas is the sandbar that we're seeing. So the sunlight can't penetrate through deeper water like it can shallow water, which is why we get different shades in the surf zone. And the whitewater is a good indication of where the sandbars are. And if you were in a rip current and you can swim to the side, swim to the whitewater, you might be able to touch bottom and walk in. Like in this case, you'd be able to walk back in, or you might be able to use the waves in the whitewater and swim back to shore. Areas where there are no breaking waves through the surf is another good clue. Remember, the water is deeper in the channel between the 2 sandbars. Here, there's sandbar to the left, to the right. Where the water is deeper, the waves aren't feeling the bottom like they are as they approach the sandbar. In some cases, they might not break until the wave moves all the way into the shoreline. So this is a good clue, and this is extending far out into the surf on this day. And remember, the surf zone width changes. It could be tidally modulated. Usually with high tide, you have a lot more water over the bar, and the waves won't break until they reach the shoreline. When you have the changes between the tide, so between low tide and as tide starts to change the high tide, you have less water available, water column depth over the bar, and typically you'll see a lot more breaking waves around a few hours either side of low tide, and that's when most of the stronger rips occur based on some statistics across the southeast. And this is Dave Baker. He's the Wrightsville Beach Ocean Rescue Director. He's rescued many people over the years, and his basic comment is that most people don't realize they're in a rip current. Sometimes they're so strong they can feel themselves being carried away, and it's obvious. But he says most victims in rip currents are trying to swim back to the beach. They look up after a while of swimming, not getting any closer, and so they swim a little harder. They look up again, not getting any closer, and so on, and they get tired. So the point of his message is if you start to feel tired and you realize you're not getting any closer to the shoreline, you're more than likely in a rip current. Now is time to swim to the side, like in this example, swim A or C. Don't stay in a course in direction B because you're staying on the treadmill in that case. This is the updated rip current sign, know your options. Recall The Weather Service, Sea Grant, and USLA, we talk about break the grip of the rip. This is an updated sign that shows the colors in the surf a little bit better and shows options to escape. If you know you're caught in a rip current, start to swim to the side as soon as you can. If you don't have enough energy to swim, then use what remaining energy you have to stay afloat. Some of these rip currents are circulatory, which means that they'll come back in and maybe push you into the waves that you can use to swim back to shore. However, in parts of the country, especially the Southeast United States, there have been studies done with Sea Grant that show that some will actually eject you farther out into the ocean. So the longer you wait, the farther the swim that you have. So begin to take action as soon as you know you have problems. And as far as if you see someone in distress, you need to know your options as well. Not only critical for the person in the water, but potentially critical for your own life. First and foremost, get help from a lifeguard. If there are no guards available, have someone call 911. Begin directing the victim to swim to the side. Use your arms to point to the one side or the other. Yell to them. If possible, try and throw them something. But never enter the water without a flotation device. If you have to go in, we're not advocating you go in to make a rescue at all, but if you have to enter the water, don't do so without a flotation device. It could be a $2 pool noodle. It could be a bodyboard. It could be a small cooler, a little cooler or something like that. Because remember, if you have to go into the water to make a rescue, by the time you get to that victim, you're going to be tired, they're going to be tired, and they're going to inadvertently push you under just so they can get air into their lungs. So you've got to be aware of that. All right, we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to share the screen with Mark.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you're getting the privileges now for your screen. You should be able to share.
Hey, Steve, it's Abby. I think you're going to continue sharing your screen and Mark is just going to go through your PowerPoints, correct?
Oh, that's right. Yes. How do I?
I'm promoting you back to presenter.
Gotcha. Sorry about that, Mark and Abby.
No worries. Perfect. I can see it.
Okay, now let me assign the keyboard and mouse is what I wanted to do. Okay, Mark.
All right, I am taking control, and hopefully we can do this without any hiccups. First, I just wanted to say thanks to Steve and Vicky, who's going to present after me. Both of those folks have done amazing work, not only with our local surf and rip current program, but they've also had a lot of influence and impacts on the national level as well. And it's a pleasure to take the virtual stage with those two because they've been hard at work behind the scenes with a lot of different things related to the RIP and surf program at our office and across the Weather Service. Also wanted to say thanks to Kure for letting us talk today and for everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to listen to us talk about rip currents. So Hurricane Lorenzo, as Steve mentioned, was a fairly significant challenge because it was so far away, right? That means it flew off the radar a bit. And Lorenzo was an intense Category 5 hurricane at one point, but it spent several days as a Category 2 or higher, about 2,000 miles away, and it sent a fairly significant long period swell to the East Coast that led to a deadly rip current event that I'm going to talk about in the next several slides. All that being said, significant rip current events and long period swells really aren't that uncommon. I know we think about it a lot on the West Coast, but in the fall, especially on the East Coast, we get several of these events a year. And if you look at wave climatology on the East Coast, there's really two peaks of wave heights. If you average waves over the last several years or decades, you're going to see two peaks in wave heights. One of them is in the spring, and the other one is in the fall because of both tropical cyclones and the beginning of frontal systems that lead to enhanced wave activity as well. Turns out that Lorenzo, again, was a particularly deadly event, and I'm going to go into some of the slides on that now if I can make sure that I can click through here. There we go. So it works, Steve. I want to do a little comparison with Hurricane Lorenzo and Hurricane Dorian. I'm sure everybody remembers Hurricane Dorian that impacted was a just a tragic event in the Bahamas, and it hugged the East Coast, stayed just off our coast in North Carolina. But Dorian in the Carolinas had 0 direct deaths. It had a handful of indirect deaths, but in the Carolinas, 0 direct deaths. Hurricane Lorenzo, again, over 2,000 miles away, we had 4 deaths in the Carolinas from Hurricane Lorenzo, over 2,000 miles away. 2 of them were in our county warning area at Kure Beach, and one of those was rip current related. And there were 7 total deaths along the East Coast. I think we had one other one in Florida. I think it was Vero Beach, and a couple on the Rockaways in New York as well. So this was a fairly widespread event that impacted the entire East Coast. And again, 7 deaths from this distant killer, where, Dorian, I'm not saying, Dorian, it was bad to give all the attention to Dorian, because obviously if it was a little further west, could have been a lot more impactful here in North Carolina. But just an interesting kind of dichotomy that Hurricane Dorian got all this attention. We had all these briefings from the Weather Service, an extensive amount of media coverage because it was local. But when you look at it from a fatality perspective, quite an interesting thing there. Again, not saying that we shouldn't have given all that attention to Dorian, but just an interesting comparison if you relate to some of the impacts. Moving right along, tragically, the National Weather Service also lost one of our own. Dr. Bill LaPenta, shown here, the director of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction. That part of the National Weather Service is in charge of all of our models. It also oversees the National Hurricane Center, the Storm Prediction Center, and the Weather Prediction Center, and some of the other national centers. Just a tragic event that occurred in Duck, North Carolina, last fall, and just a reminder that none of us are immune to this threat that is rip currents and dangers in the surf zone. So looking back at Hurricane Lorenzo, Lorenzo, again, a major hurricane that was fairly typical. It started as a fairly typical Cape Verde tropical cyclone in late September of 2019, and then it recurved, moved very slowly, which I'm going to get into in a minute, and peaked in intensity late September, I believe it was September 29th, where it hit Category 5 status. Was a powerful major hurricane for several days, and a major hurricane just Category 3 or higher. And it broke a record actually for being the northern and I believe also the easternmost Category 5 on record in the Atlantic Basin. And it recurved again, seemingly safely out to sea, but it again, as I mentioned in the beginning, it generated a fairly significant swell event for the Western Atlantic. Wasn't all that big by the time it reached the East Coast, but it was a very long period, which was the key to this event. So the next couple of slides, I apologize if you've done some wave forecasting in the past. They're going to seem pretty rudimentary, but I know there's a wide variety of backgrounds on the call today. So I wanted to go into a couple fundamentals of waves and wave forecasting on the next couple of slides. So waves have 3 very fundamental characteristics. They all have a wave height, they all have a wave period, and they all have a wave direction. Wave height and direction are pretty straightforward. Height, just how tall it is from trough to crest. Wave direction that's fairly straightforward as well. Is it moving at you? Is it moving away from you? Is it moving parallel to the shore? Is it coming from this direction or that? Those 2 parameters are fairly straightforward, but wave period is a little bit less straightforward. I'm going to go into that a little bit now. The easy answer to what wave period is it's the time for successive waves to pass a fixed point, such as a buoy. The more complicated answer for wave period is that it's directly related to a lot of stuff that we care a lot about. For example, it usually influences surf height. It's directly related to how much energy waves have, how fast they move, and also how deep they extend into the ocean. So wave period influences a lot of really important characteristics, especially as waves start to get close into the surf zone and do all kinds of fun things like bend and break and stuff like that. So for Lorenzo swells to reach the East Coast, I'm going to go over a little math. And luckily, we've got some fairly sophisticated wave models, so we don't have to do a lot of the stuff we used to have to do in the 80s to figure out when swells are going to reach a coastline. But waves travel in groups, and group velocity is 1.5 times the wave period. The period of the Hurricane Lorenzo swell, right around 15 seconds. So that means that the group velocity of the swells, the waves heading at the East Coast, was about 22.5 knots. So we know how far away Lorenzo was. We know how fast its waves were moving at us, so we can calculate how long it will take for the waves to reach, in our case, the coast of North Carolina or South Carolina. So really basic physics that you learned probably in sometime around the 8th or 9th grade. Distance equals rate times time. So we know that, again, we know how far Lorenzo was from us. We know how fast its waves were moving. So that takes about 98 hours or about 4 days for the waves to reach the coast of North Carolina, which we were very interested in during the Hurricane Lorenzo swell event. And again, luckily, we don't have to do a lot of this stuff by hand anymore because of the sophisticated wave models we have, such as the WaveWatch 3 and the Nearshore Wave Prediction System. So the incidents that occurred on the East Coast, let me go back one here. The clicking is impacting things remotely. Sorry about that. So if we look 4 days before the incidents on the East Coast, all of the fatalities were September 30th to October 3rd. So that means we are really interested in the characteristics of Hurricane Lorenzo about 4 days before that. Because remember in the last slide, we know it takes about 4 days for the swells to get to the East Coast. So 4 days before, this highlighted area here in the track is September 26th to 30th. And if we look at this, the orange colors represent category 2 or higher. The purple colors are 4 and 5. There might be a time in here that's not represented by the chart, but the vast majority of the time that we are interested in Hurricane Lorenzo, it was a major hurricane, and it was also moving very slowly or directly at the East Coast. There's a little time here where it's moving away from us, but it was moving very slowly. A hurricane's track is really important, or any storm's track for that matter, in determining how much swell is going to reach a beach of interest. In our case, it was Kure Beach or Wrightsville or Myrtle Beach. That's in our county warning area. But a storm that's moving at you generates waves much more effectively for that location than one that's moving away from you. And the same thing, if a storm's moving very slowly, it can generate swell very effectively in all directions. So it turns out that just 4 days before the incidents on the East Coast, the storm had those characteristics of moving very slow or at the East Coast, and also being a very intense major hurricane. So it was generating swell very effectively for the East Coast. So 4 days ahead of time, if you were thinking about going to the beach, say you're in Raleigh or Charlotte or somewhere that's inland, and you're looking at the forecast 4 days ahead of time, this is what the forecast looked like. You're probably focusing on the fact that, oh my gosh, it's going to be sunny. There's literally no chance of rain. Air temperatures are above normal. And if you happen to look at the water temps, they were also above normal. The water temperature at Wrightsville was 81 degrees at Johnny Mercer Pier. And I think the average is about 78 or maybe 79. So we had above normal water temperatures, above normal air temperatures, sunny skies, and no precipitation in the forecast. Meanwhile, what you may not have been looking at is over 2,000 miles away, you had this going on. And this was literally right around the time that Hurricane Lorenzo was undergoing rapid intensification. It was going from category 3 to category 5. If you look close enough, I don't know how this loop is coming across through the WebEx, but you see some really cold cloud tops just north of the center. And that is actually the part of the storm that is aiming winds right at the East Coast. So we had that, again, this distant kind of killer and kind of a recipe for disaster with a really good looking forecast, above normal water temperatures. And it could have been the last thing on your mind that you had this major hurricane over 2,000 miles away. So looking at, this is just a graph showing the buoy observations from the Current buoy 41110. That's Kure supported. Thank you very much. We appreciate your support. But looking back at the buoy observations from this event, from October 1st and 2nd, the incidents that occurred in our county warning area at Kure Beach were on October 2nd. And we basically had, well, let me go over this graph a little bit. The blue line represents wave height at that buoy that's just offshore Masonboro Inlet. The red line represents wave period, and that is characterized by the y-axis on the right. wave height is the y-axis on the left. So essentially for about 2 days in a row, we had buoy observations at about 3 feet at 15 seconds, a little, maybe up to about 4 feet. And the period was anywhere between 13 and 16 seconds. But in general, around a 3-foot swell, 15 seconds. And an interesting thing that I'm going to go over in a minute is we've had a lot of problems in the past for these low height, high period events. So you don't need a 6, 7, 8, 10-foot plus swell to do a lot of bad things. There's a lot of sensitivity to rip current rescues in our database with these low height, high period events, and that's definitely what this was. So looking at some of the experimental rip current probabilities, so this is something that we're really excited about in the National Weather Service. The nearshore wave prediction system, which is our kind of our core wave model that we use to produce a variety of products, has a new rip current probability product that is coming online now. It's an experimental mode in our county warning area. Victoria is going to show you a link to this when she talks of how to access this information, but something we're really excited to learn more about. This is just a graph that shows the rip current probabilities from this new experimental product during the time of October 1 and 2 of 2019 during the long period swell event from Hurricane Lorenzo. And essentially the entire period was about 80 to 100% chance of a dangerous rip current occurring. And you see the sinusoidal nature of it. That's basically because there's tides built into the model. The probability of a dangerous rip current occurring goes up at low tides and it goes down at high tides. That's not saying that we can't get dangerous rip currents at high tide. It just says that the model is sensitive to the low tide time frame. And if you look at when one of the rip current event deaths occurred at Kure Beach, October 2nd, just before 10 a.m., it was showing about an 80-90% chance of a dangerous rip currents occurring. So we think that this new product shows some promise. There's a lot of calibration and understanding that needs to be done in our office to really operationalize this, but it definitely shows some promise, and we're looking forward to using it in the years to come. So what did our forecast look like? Well, I'm not here to pat ourselves on the back because there's a lot of work to do, but we did have a pretty good forecast out. The risk was high for our east-facing beaches, and that makes a lot of sense because the swell had a lot of east in it. The south-facing beaches in our county warning area had a moderate rip current threat out in effect, and we had good social media coverage. Our surf forecast was right in line with the observations, but again, despite the good forecast, there's a lot of work to do, and we're going to go over some of the things that we're working on at our office to improve, again, this from happening in the future, and Vicky's going to go over a lot of those details as well. So one of the things that we're working on to help drive awareness of some of the different very fundamental characteristics of waves that can lead to these dangerous rip current events is we're starting to add wave detail to our marine forecast. On an experimental basis, just a couple of weeks ago, we put out a website in coordination with Eastern Region Headquarters to essentially add wave detail in the form of wave height, period, and direction to our coastal waters forecast on a website that I've shown here, where in the past, we may have had something that looked like northeast winds 20 to 30 knots, seas 6 to 8 feet. Now in this experimental coastal waters forecast that you can, again, view on these websites here, that is going to say something like, okay, northeast winds 20 to 30, seas 6 to 8 feet, and then adding the wave detail components such as northeast 7 feet at 6 seconds and southeast 4 feet at 15 seconds. Before we were only showing the significant wave height at the top, and now we're supplementing that with, okay, what are the characteristics that are making up that significant wave height? Is there one group present? Is there two wave groups present? And more importantly, what are their height, periods, and directions? So this is a plea to all of you to please look at this website, especially if you're in our county warning area across Southeast North Carolina and Northeast South Carolina, and give us feedback. And we're really looking forward to looking with our headquarters to see how we might be able to evolve this and work with the other parts of the agency to grow this throughout the agency in the years to come. So last slide here, a few lessons learned from the Hurricane Lorenzo event. It was obviously a tragic rip current event up and down the East Coast with 4 deaths in the Carolinas and 7 total up and down the East Coast. The wave conditions, about a 3-foot swell at 15 seconds. But again, we also had above normal air temperatures, above normal water temperatures, and sunny skies locally. So again, a recipe for disaster there. Low wave height, high period events are especially dangerous based on past rip current events that we've observed. There's a lot of speculation to why that is, but it's also interesting that the new probabilistic rip current model, I was talking to the developers about a month ago, and they said there's definitely a sensitivity to the archive rip current reports that they used to make that model on the low height, long period events. So it's definitely something we're concerned about. Those new rip current probabilities show a lot of promise. We're looking forward to operationalizing them locally and across the agency. Our forecast was fairly good for this event, but there's a lot more to do. And I think that we're starting to see the pendulum swing with this threat in general to where, okay, at least locally, we think it's time to start treating this hazard a little bit more like we do with some of the traditional hazards, such as severe weather, flooding, and things like that. And we're focusing on 3 things to improve our ability to save lives from rip currents right now. And this is by no means everything we're working on, but 3 of the things we're really focusing on in our office are, again, treating rip currents and dangerous surf more like the traditional hazards, again, such as severe weather and flooding, where we do all kinds of briefings and decision support for those other things. And we've seen a lot of growth in this with rip currents and surf over the years, but there's a lot more work to do to kind of get it more on the same level as some of those other traditional hazards. We're really looking to modernize the product suite. As I showed before, the wave detail project is one thing, but I think there's a lot of momentum and drive to do things like, okay, if we can predict winds and waves out 7 days every hour, maybe we should think about doing that for rip currents too. So we're really taking a hard look at that and looking forward to working with different parts of our agency to grow our products and services to get more like some of the other things we do. And as Steve mentioned, we're doing a lot for driving awareness, not only at the coast, but also away from the coast as well, with our media partners and other core partners and other National Weather Service offices as well. So that's it for me, and looking forward to hearing what Vicki has to say in the next several slides.
Okay, Vicki, I'm about to pass the controls over to you.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, sweet.
Okay, you should have control.
All right, let's see. There
you go.
Are the slides advanced on your end?
Yes, they just did.
Okay, because I think I'm having problems on my end, but I'll work with it. All right. Okay, so all right, so I'm here to talk about the National Weather Service Rip Current Program, both nationally and locally, and how we're constantly evolving to address all aspects of this rip current problem, as well as meet the needs of the public. So we've got a couple of things that have changed recently, and we've got some things coming that we're excited about. So I'm gonna begin. I want to talk about some of our partnerships we have that help us with rip current forecasting, messaging, pretty much all aspects. So one of our strongest partnerships is with local lifeguards and beach patrol groups. In our area, we have a 2-way communication with them year round. Especially during beach season, they provide us with ground truth observations. And what these observations do is they help us verify our forecasts, improve our forecasting. We've done studies using their observations, and we can also do climatologies. So, for example, we have 16 years worth of ground truth observations from Wrightsville Beach. It's a beach from ours, and what we see in those 16 years is that there's a peak in strong rip currents in the month of September, which correlates to peak in the Atlantic hurricane season. And so having this wealth of information is, very valuable. Our beach groups also help us with Rip Current messaging. They share our forecasts on social media. They put up posts about Rip Current safety on their beaches. We have one group that actually puts Rip Current safety on frisbees that they give out at the beaches. They also put up flotation device stations. They're very, very, very good at what they do. And another thing is that, these lifeguards and beach patrol groups know way more about their beaches than we could know. And so being able to tap into that information really helps with our forecasting messaging. And so we try meeting with them as much as we can, try to, pick their brain as much as we can. And so other partnerships that we have at our area is with the NWS Sea Grant Program. As Steve mentioned, helped create the new Rip Current sign, the Know Your Options, and the old Break the Grip of the Rip. They also assist with Rip Current messaging, doing projects along the coast for Rip Currents, such as drifter deployments. We also partner with the North Carolina Division of Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, trying to help increase awareness of Rip Current hard to reach communities. We have an upcoming webinar in June that will have interpretive services available, including a sign language interpreter and captioning. And we're really excited about this, try to spread the message to people that might not have access to the information that most have available. And last but definitely not least, the National Weather Service has a strong relationship with the broadcast media across the country. And when it comes to Rip Currents, they help us spread the message during big events, promote safety. There's actually even like a broadcast meteorologist in Charlotte that is really strong on Rip Current messaging. So he likes promoting it, well inland, which is really, really great. All right. So one of the biggest products that we do when it comes to Rip Currents is the zone forecast. So all coastal National Weather Service offices and Great Lake offices issue surf forecasts daily during local beach seasons. For the Wilmington area, that is between April and October, and we issue this forecast 3 times a day. So what is this forecast? Well, the forecast contains, very valuable information that everyone should be aware of before going to the beach. Includes rip current risks, surf heights, the weather, any other potential hazards they may face, UV index, pretty much everything they need to know. And this past April, there was a national format created that made it mandatory for everyone to issue a 2-day full forecast. Previously, it was only a 1-day forecast, but now it goes out 2 days. It's a national format, so all of them should look, really similar. So it shouldn't be hard to, travel between areas and still be able to find the information you're looking for. At the Wilmington office, last year, we started an Outlook section in our surf. And what this allows us to do is highlight the rip current risk out to 4 days. So we try to give the public as much a heads up as we can for, maybe there's a strong rip event in like 3 or 4 days, let people know that they're planning on the beach, maybe keep an eye on the forecast, see if that changes. National Weather Service also issues hazard products and statements for, strong rip days, strong longshore, sneaker waves, anything that, high surf, any of these, big hazards that people might. When it comes to decision support, the National Weather Service tries to leverage, as much avenue as we can to inform the public, media, everyone of, hazardous rip currents occurring. So these are some examples from the recent Tropical Storm Arthur event that Arthur didn't have much impact for our forecast area, except when it came to rip currents and high seas. And so we wanted to message the strong, rip current risk as much as we can. So we leverage social media, chats, try to get the message out that even though the storm's staying offshore, the beaches are still going to be hazardous. So, like I said, we keep trying to find new ways to get the message out when, Again, weather might be nice, but the beaches might not be, the best place to be. I just wanted to share these graphics real quick. This is something that Steve and I worked on a couple of months ago, when we're trying to address this, inland problem of rip currents. Majority of fatalities are from inland areas. So we developed these graphics that, pretty universal, that could be shared, as far and wide as, we could possibly get it. Just contains brief information on what rip currents are, what to do if you're in them, and try to get people's attention to, even though don't live at the beach, you should know about rip currents. And so, we have these out here, hopefully, during the course of the summer and, even next year, help continue to spread as far as we can to, spread the message. Because a lot of our visitors are from Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and, might not be familiar with rip currents. They don't hear it as often as, our coastal counties. So keep trying to find ways to spread the message as well as we can. So one of the improvements to forecasting that we're trying to undertake here at the Wilmington office is we want to try to develop some kind of surf matrix, which we want to add a temporal resolution to our surf forecast. Right now, it's just a 24-hour forecast, per day. If maybe it's only going to be strong rips for a few hours in the afternoon, but it'll say, high risk the entire day. So what we want to try to do is change it to a 24-hour forecast and break it up into some kind of increment, maybe 3 hours, maybe 6 hours, something to show the trends in the risks. So that maybe, it's really bad in the morning, but give people hope that if you go in the afternoon, you'll have, safer seas. And so the image shown here is an example from, it's an internal product of ours that we're testing, see, constantly improving it, seeing if this might be something that we envision it may look like in the future. If not this summer, maybe next summer, try to get a product like this out to the public. And last but not least, I just want to talk a little bit more about the Rip Current probability model that Mark had shared earlier. And so this model was developed by Dr. Dusek at the National Ocean Service, and it was aided by local lifeguard reports. And it uses our nearshore wave prediction system model to generate the probability of the likelihood of hazardous rip currents occurring at the beaches. And so, as Mark mentioned, it's still experimental. We're undergoing testing here, see, how we can calibrate it, how we can use this model to improve our forecasting. It may also prove vital when we, transition into the oral aspect of rip current forecasting, because this model shows, I think, every hour or so, or every 3 hours, like how the rip current threat evolves throughout the day. And so we're very excited about it, and it is still experimental. The link on the slide is available for anyone to have access to the rip current probabilities, but they are experimental. Hopefully, keep working on it. And then the last slide I have just shows like a detailed, I guess, rip current prob time series. If you go on the NWPS website, you can zoom in to click on like a point along the coast. And this time series shows a point from Emerald Isle, North Carolina, just to our north. But you can see, the next 4 or 5 days, how the rip current threat is trending. It's going to go down next 2 days or increase. And it also shows you different components that go into the model. Surf height, the direction of the incoming wave normal to the coastline, which is very important for rip currents, the tide levels. And so, again, there's a wealth of information here, and, we're excited to keep using it, see how it works. And that's it from me. If you know where to find more information for the NWS Rip Current Safety Site, USLA, and Sea Grant Program. So check these out for more information, safety videos, graphics you can share. And that's it for me.
Okay, Vicky, thanks. And thanks, Mark. It's just a significant task we have at hand. You think about the three different parts of the presentations. From mine, what we can learn from the statistics. Again, I feel like we do an okay job, good job, in fact, with telling people what to do if they're caught in a rip current. But we need to really ramp up our efforts to get to more people in those inland areas. And that's pretty much across the country, working with other weather service offices to, maybe even show that slide that Vicky had, the little PSA, one or two slides, just something to get their feet wet before they come to the beach. And also getting information to the potential bystander, what are the options that they have before just jumping into the water unprepared. So those are important things we get from the statistics. Also, what Mark really showed a case that hits home, why they're so dangerous. Remember, one of the four considerations, the worst events can occur with the best weather, and the Lorenzo case fit that to the T. Unfortunately, it was a perfect culmination of things that came together for the East Coast last year. And then also Vicky illustrating the importance of partnerships, the boots at the ground type of partnerships right at the beach, the academic partnerships, the partnerships with Sea Grant, with USLA, the partnerships with our media, and then the constant push to do a better job, the constant push to keep people safe when they go to the beach. They're thinking about rip currents. They know what to do if they're caught in a rip current, so they can have a safe time when they visit our beaches. And with that, Abby, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you guys for a great presentation. And a lot of people have asked if a recording of this presentation will be available. We will post it on the Socorro website, so that will be available to everyone. It takes about 72 hours for WebEx to turn around a recording. And so we do have about 4 questions that have come in. Do you guys have time to answer? Seeing that it's 12:57, do you think we can hang out till 1:05 and get these questions answered?
Sure.
Great. The first one is from Jill Andrews. Is there a comprehensive assessment or map of where rip currents occur most frequently?
We often get the question about this related to the types of rip currents. I mean, you have rip currents that are fixed, something next to a pier or a revetment, and in particular in Southeast North Carolina, we have a lot of piers which can focus rip currents. We also have the Fort Fisher revetment where you can find them very, very frequently. Other times they're quite transitory depending on how the sandbars change. So wherever there's breaks in the sandbars, it might be a semi-permanent type rip where it might be in that general area for a few days or for a week, and then you get storms that come by and change the configuration of everything, and the whole thing is constantly nebulous, sometimes over greater periods of time. But as far as locations of rip currents, you're almost always going to find them next to some structure.
Great, thanks, Steve. We have another question from Phil Warnett. Given that rip currents are at least partially controlled by breaks in the nearshore bars and that nearshore bar structure will likely vary along shore, how does the rip current model account for this more localized surf zone variation in nearshore bar structure that will change through time? And are these variations in nearshore bar structure through time included in the modeling? Mark,
do you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, I'll do my best to channel my inner Greg Dusek and Andre van der Westerhuizen. I think that the way the model accounts for that is by using past wave conditions as a proxy. And I think Greg probably has a lot more information on this, but for example, it's really hard to model exactly where rip currents are going to occur based on the bathymetry changes that Steve just mentioned. Every storm, the local sandbars can change. That's really hard. So I think what the model tries to do is it uses, okay, have we had enhanced swell activity over the last several days, and it uses that as a proxy for bathymetry. And there's a lot more details. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the gist of it, because there's been some research done that suggests, okay, we've had dangerous surf over the last few days. It's more apt to lead to bathymetric features that are going to enhance RIP. So I think that's what they use as a proxy for now, but it's a really good point, and something that's really hard to physically model, that hopefully we can get to in sometime in the future.
Great, thank you. And then we do have a question. What is the official name for that RIP current model, Mark? Do you know that?
It's a part of the nearshore wave prediction system, and it's the probabilistic rip current model. I mean, that's what I've been calling it. Hopefully I haven't been misnaming it, but it's part of the nearshore wave prediction system, and you can access it on the that link that Vicky has in her slides.
Okay, perfect. I will be sure to share that with you all. And then we have one more question. Any thought to having more than 3 RIP current risk levels? Again, this is on the model of high, moderate, low, perhaps 5 levels. Sorry if you could hear my dog. Marginal, slight, moderate, high, and extreme.
Vicky, did you want to take that one? I don't know if you're muted.
Yeah, if you guys can still hear me, I know I think they're re-looking at some of the categories recently. But it's kind of hard, even now, people have a hard time understanding the difference between, let's say, moderate and high. And so I don't know, like adding more categories might just add confusion, or I definitely think it might be, I honestly don't know if the benefit of having more than 3, maybe fine tuning the definition, or maybe one more for Mark's going the term of super RIP events. If we've got multiple days of like really strong RIP currents, a lot of rescues, that might warrant like just an extra strong wording. But it is pretty, at least for our forecasts, our surf forecast of low, moderate, and high, I don't think there's current plans to add more, but as we work on changing the RIP current, advancing the RIP current program to have more views, I guess you could say. I wouldn't say it's out of the question.
And to follow up what Vicky was saying, as this forecasting and messaging has evolved over the last 2 decades, really we're dealing with just basic schemes, and we couldn't be elaborate really based on the forecasting. But now with the introduction of the probabilistic rip current information and being able to convey impacts like Vicky was mentioning, if we know we're going to have a big outbreak, I think the wording is in the message is just as important versus trying to dilute the low, moderate, high. Plus, I think most of the flags that lifeguards use are either green, yellow, or red, so it kind of matches that convention as well.
Great, thank you both. And we have time for one more question before we close. And actually, Steve, can you go back one slide? Somebody is interested in looking at Vicky's, yes. This is where you find more information. John Wallace, if you want to screen grab this. And then from Mike Buchanan, do you use Girling-Hansen plots to help determine timing and period of approaching waves or swells?
I can take that one, Steve. 100%, yes. The Girling-Hansen plots are an integral part of our forecast process, another product of the nearshore wave prediction system, and you can access those online as well. But yeah, it's a great way to look at a spectral wave forecast and get an idea of what swells or wave systems are going to impact a beach of interest.
Great, thanks so much. And if we didn't get to your questions, we'll do our best to follow up through them via email. Seeing that's 1:05 and we're 5 minutes over, let's go ahead and close. Thank you guys again, Vicki, Steve, and Mark, for presenting. This was a great presentation. I cannot wait to post it and share it. Everybody has been sending their kudos. So thank you guys again. This was wonderful. And if we didn't get to your questions, we'll try to get to them later this week and have everything answered. And that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.